Hello everyone, welcome to Liam's Lyceum. I'm your host Liam, aka Himbar, and today I'm doing a video I do once a year, and it's not my top 10 books of the year. No, it is my authors I've read the most books by, or my most read authors. This is my update. So I made my first one around this time in 2021, which is crazy to think. And then I made an update for 2022, and I'm going to update again for 2023. There has been a good amount of shifting around this time. So I go over the top 10, but it includes more than 10 authors because, for example, if I've read 10 books by one author, um, then, he or she will have that one spot by his or herself. But if I've read, say, 9 books by several authors, I'll mention all those um, authors and they'll tie basically for a spot. So I actually have more than 10 authors on this list. I did want to mention real quick a couple who got kicked off this list. I believe the last 2 times I had Lee French and Eric Court from the Greatest Sin series. I believe there's only 6 books on that series. I've read all 6. Um, and then I had Christopher Rocchio, who I've read his 5 Sunny novels and his 2 novellas. I was counting. He is no longer on the list as well. I should be reading that new novella here soon. So if I just made this, a little later, he'd probably still be on the list. But and Jack Vance, who was not on the list last year, is now actually tied with Christopher Rocchio as of making this, and tied with Lee French and Eric Court actually is Rogers Lasney and Lynn Abbey. But neither of those had made the list before, anyways. So coming in at number 10 with 8 books read, I have Tracy Hickman and Margaret Weiss. Okay, I've read 4 Dragonlance novels by them and 4 Deathgate Cycle novels by them. So I read the original Dragonlance Chronicles, the trilogy, Dragons of Autumn Twilight, Dragons of Winter Night, and Dragons of Spring Dawning. And then I've read Time of the Twins, I believe, is the next one. The first in the Legends trilogy. I haven't continued that trilogy yet. I plan on it. And then I've also read the first Deathgate Cycle books, first 4. So Dragonwing, Elven Star, Fire Sea, and Serpent Mage. Serpent Mage I read only a couple weeks ago, and I enjoyed it quite a bit, actually. Serpent Mage is probably my favorite Weiss and Hickman novel I've read. It's kind of up there with Dragons of Autumn Twilight, though. I did enjoy that one more than the other Dragonlance books I've read so far. But yeah, so, but also tied at number 10 with another 8 books, right, is Troy Denning, who's not an author I'm like a huge fan of. He just so happens to have written stuff that I wanted to read, I guess. So I've read 2 Halo novels by him. There's Halo Silent Storm, I believe, and Halo Oblivion. It's been several years. I have another Halo novel by him I haven't read, and I've had that one for a couple of years. And I've read several, I think the rest actually. So he's a what I'd call a universe writer or an IP writer. He writes for these other IPs, right? So I read his 2 Halo novels. He's written 3, I think. Maybe he's written more. But and then I've read 6, I believe, Forgotten Realms novels by this guy so far. I've read Faces of Deception, which is book 2 in the Lost Empire series. One of my least favorite Forgotten Realms novels. It just has such a non-ending, and I mean, I realize a lot of your expectations or your enjoyment is based off your expectations, and it's not a terrible novel. You know what I mean? Like, it leaves a lot of stuff up in the air, right? And so I just probably wasn't expecting an experimental novel in the Forgotten Realms, to be completely honest. So, but I get surprised actually sometimes with Forgotten Realms novels. Same with like Lynn Abbey, the first novel I read by her in Another Scroll. Um, and I remember Faces of Deception much more than a lot of other Forgotten Realms novels, and it's been a couple of years since I finished it. And then the Part C, which I read recently, that review was actually, well, as of recording this, it comes out in a couple days, but that one just came out. And then the sequel to Part C, which is The Veiled Dragon. Then I've read Waterdeep by him, which was originally published under the pen name Richard Allinson. And then Crucible, The Trial of Sirik the Mad, which is great. I think probably my favorite novel I've read by him. This is the 5th of the Avatar series for the Forgotten Realms. Waterdeep is number 3, by the way. And then I read The Sentinel, which is I don't see, like, I have my problems with Faces of Deception, but The Sentinel is actually just rather boring, and that was my big problem with The Sentinel. And that's one of the Sundering books, so it's actually one of the few you can get in print at like Barnes & Noble because it's a 5th edition novel, and there's like none of those. They still keep those in print, but that's about it. And then also at number 10 with another 8 books is Erin M. Evans. She has not changed, I don't think, from last year. I had read her 6 Brimstone Angels novels, which are the first Forgotten Realms novels I ever read. They're superb. And then The Godcatcher, which is her only other Forgotten Realms novel, which is also a great novel about a wizard turned thief, if you wanted that. And there's also a dragon stuck in human form in that novel. And then I read Empire of Exiles, which I think I read about a year ago this time. So I believe it was in my video for this, my update last year. Empire of Exiles, which is supposed to have a sequel at some point. That is not Forgotten Realms. That is just our own fantasy world. And then new to the list at number 9. This is actually number 9, I think, is my biggest. I have 4 at number 9, by the way. So with 10 books read, I guess I haven't read 9 books from anyone. That's weird. Okay, I've read. I have Steven Erikson. He's new to the list, right? So I've been reading a lot more Malazan this year. I think last year I had read, I think, up to Dead House Gates when I made this video, so I wasn't that far into the series at all. So I read up through Reaper's Gale, and I'm also counting again novellas here. And so I've read 3 Book Lane and Corporal Brooch novellas: Blood Follows, The Healthy Dead, and The Lees of Laughter's End. So Steven Erikson is really enjoyable. I think he's really talented. He's kind of getting to become a favorite. We'll see how Malazan ends, I think. But I enjoy his writing. I think it's worthwhile. So, and then tied with him is another author who's very worthwhile. And I can't remember if he was on this list last year or not. I feel like if he was near the bottom. But it's Gene Wolfe, also a 10, right? I've read The Book of the New Sun as 4 books. Earth of the New Sun, which is 5. Book of the Long Sun, which I read. I think I read all of those after last year's update. So that is 9. And then I've also read Fifth Head of Cerberus. So I've only read 1 book that's not a part of the solar cycle. The next books I read by him will probably be the Book of the Short Sun. I'm not quite sure. I've read some of his short stories as well. But Gene Wolfe is superb, honestly. Like, he is rarely surpassed, in my opinion, by any author. Just amazing, in my opinion. Extremely worthwhile. I think he is very worthwhile, even if you don't want to think about it, but because it just, mess up your mind. But lots to think about, basically, when you read Gene Wolfe. So, as always, right? One of my favorite novels I read this year was Fifth Head of Cerberus. So, and then also at number 9 with 10 books read is Paul S. Kemp, who was on this list. I think this went up by 1, maybe 2 since last time I made this update. I read his Shadow's Witness, which is book 2, I believe, in Sembia series for Forgotten Realms. His Hair of Scale trilogy, his Twilight War trilogy, which is a sequel trilogy, the Hair of Scale trilogy, and Godborn, which is a sequel to that, which was supposed to be a trilogy, and so it's not as good because they made him do it all in 1 book. And then I can't remember if I had read The Hammer and the Blade by this time last year. But that is his own fantasy series, not Forgotten Realms. It's very sword and sorcery, very much Fafhrd and the Grey Mouser type of thing going on. And then I read the sequel recently, A Discourse in Steel. And there's 1 more book in that series that I plan on reading. I'll probably have it read by this time. By the time I do this update next year. And that is A Conversation of Blood. But as of right now, I've read 10 by him. I don't know of any other novels I'll read by him. I know he does Star Wars novels, and I don't really care personally. So we'll see if I read anything else by him after that last Aeol and Nyx novel. Then also at number 9 with 10 books read, who was on the list, I'm sure, last year, is Joel Shepherd. I read his 8 Spiral Wars novels that are out right now, and I've read 2 of the 6 Cassandra Kresnov novels. I started book 3 a while ago. I haven't finished it. I imagine I had read maybe 1 Cassandra Kresnov novel when I made this video last year, and not the second one. Sure, I read all 8 of the Spiral Wars. Maybe, I'm not sure. Again, but he's at number 9. And then at number 8, I only have 1 at number 8. So you don't have to hear me. I'm already 9 minutes in. 1 at number 8, I have DJ Butler. Dave is awesome. He's a great author. I have read 11 books by him. I've read his 4 Witchy War books that are out right now. I've read his 2 Hiram Woolley books that are out right now, and he's writing The Familiar Spirit, which is book 3, and I'm super excited for that. I've read The Wilding Probate, which is more of a YA like thriller. I've read Abbott in Darkness, which is sci-fi. And then I read In the Palace, Shadow and Joy, In Between Princesses and Other Jobs, those are both like Vancian, kind of Liberian, like Sword and Planet, and they're funny. They're one of the few fantasy series I go out of my way to actually get anthologies when they appear in the anthology, so I can just read the Indrajit and Fix stories. And then I've read Time Trials, which came out this year as well. So he went up to 11. I know he was on this list last year, but he's moved up as well. Maybe he's in the same spot, but I've read more books by him. And then at number 7, again, I only have one number 7, is Fritz Leiber. I've read 12 books by Leiber, read several other short stories by Leiber. Leiber is one of my favorite authors. He's amazing. I have a book by his son right here. Leiber is amazing. I'm naming my son Fritz. Anyways, I've read his 7 Thought from the Grey Mouser novels or Linkmar novels. I've read Gather Darkness, which is kind of what's 1940s sci-fi. There's a sick lightsaber fight duel in this book, and they're not quite lightsabers. I'm pretty sure that's like listed as one of the like possible inspirations for lightsabers in Star Wars. I've read Our Lady of Darkness, which is a creepy, stinking horror novel. I read The Big Time, which is a fun sci-fi novel, won the Hugo Award, I believe. I read The Green Millennium, which I thought was even more fun sci-fi novel. And then I've read The Night of the Long Knives, which was also extremely fun, more of a novella, but and that's like post-apocalyptic kind of. So yeah, Fritz Leiber, in my opinion, you cannot go wrong with Fritz Leiber. So whatever he's writing, I have a book by him, and in it calls him basically the only grandmaster of horror, science fiction, and fantasy. That book came out in the late 80s, but I wouldn't be surprised if that's still the only case, that he's the only one who's gotten awards, calling this person a master of the 3 big speculative fiction genres. So the guy is nuts. Okay, he's phenomenal. If you haven't read Fritz Leiber, you're doing it wrong. Anyways, at 6 is a longtime member of this list that has not changed. I have not read anything by him in years. That is Rick Riordan. I read all his Percy Jackson books, The Heroes of Olympus, and the Kane Chronicles. I stopped after reading Kane Chronicles. I didn't read any other series. Probably never will, to be honest. So, but I enjoyed those a lot, like in 8th grade or so. And then at number 5, I have 2 number 5s, actually. This guy was on the list last year. It's Ed Greenwood. I've talked with Ed on my channel. He's the creator of the Forgotten Realms. I've read 3 of the Elminster books, which is up by 1 at least from last year. I've read the 3 Shadow of the Avatar trilogy. I've read Best of the Realms 2, which is a collection of short stories set in the Forgotten Realms. I've read Spellstorm, another Forgotten Realms novel, The Herald, another Forgotten Realms novel, the 3 Chandril saga books, which are also Forgotten Realms. And then I've read The One-Eyed King by Greenwood, which is not Forgotten Realms. It's for the Fate of the Norns, so it's like 9th, 10th, maybe, I can't remember, 9th century Dublin. And then The Kingless Land, which is not Forgotten Realms, but is fantasy, and it's his own secondary world. Well, I mean, he created Forgotten Realms, that's his own world, but he can't publish in it without permission, which is dumb. But so The Kingless Land is first in the Band of 4 series. That's the last book I read by him. It's been a couple months, so I'll probably read something else by him soon. And here's another person tied with Greenwood at 5 with 14 books. That hasn't changed in years and probably will not, is Kate Tiernan, who wrote the Sweep series, which are like kind of new age Wicca like books. They're definitely YA, I'd say. I read those when I was like 17, I think, all of them. So yeah, I'm almost certainly never, I don't know what else she wrote, to be honest. So and then at number 4, who I think he was at number 3 before. A couple people have moved up, so one person's really kind of shuffled things around. So, but J.R.R. Tolkien, who I've always put with Christopher Tolkien, because a lot of those books are edited by Christopher Tolkien, and it's always a ish. So he's in the 4th spot with 15-ish books, right? Because I read the Lord of the Rings. I'm reading Lord of the Rings again right now, so I mean, if we count rereads, he's higher, but because he's really the only author I reread. And then I've read The Hobbit, again, rereads. And then I've read the 3 Great Tales books, Silmarillion, there's Unfinished Tales, there's Beowulf, there's Sir Gawain and the Green Knights, and there's other stories in there like Sir Orfeo and Pearl. I guess they're not his, there's translations. There's Finn and Hengist, there's Sigurd and Gudrun. I did read The Fall of Arthur for the first time this year, so he's gone up from that. And I read The Battle of Maldon, which came out this year, so he's also gone up from that. So yeah, Tolkien is the GOAT of authors, in my opinion. So Um, but he sits at only number 4 because, admittedly, he didn't write all that much. Most of this stuff was published after he died. So, and then at number 3, who's actually tied with someone else at number 3. This guy was on the list last year, but he jumped up a lot, I believe, because I read a ton of them after I made the update last year, and that is Michael Moorcock. It's been since March, I think, since I've read anything by him, so I need to read something else. And I know what series it is because I've read his 9 Elric novels. I've read 3 of the Dream Quest trilogy, which are kind of Elric novels as well. I read the 3 Quorum books, the first trilogy. I have not read the second trilogy. And then I've read the first Dancers at the End of Time book. So the next ones I'll read will be the next 2 Dancers books, and then I'll probably read that second Quorum trilogy because I really liked Quorum when I read those. But we'll see. It might be Von Beck, or I don't know. There's so much to read by Moorcock. So, yeah, so 16, and tied with him is Robert Jordan, who has not moved last year. So there was someone else that Robert Jordan was tied with last year. If you remember, I'll mention him in a minute. But that person's moved up. Robert Jordan is not. Again, I've mentioned this last 2 times. I'll probably at some point read New Spring. I'm not that interested. I'm not a huge Wheel of Time fan, but I have read the 14 Wheel of Time books. I read The Warrior of the Altai, which is my favorite book by Jordan, even though it's got problems. And then I've read his first Conan novel, Conan the Invincible, which has more problems, if you can believe it. So, yeah, anyways, Jordan's one of those authors that's kind of a love-hate relationship with me. I like a lot of the things he wrote in The Wheel of Time, but for the most part, well, let's just say I got to the end of the series and I was like, I don't feel like this was worth it. So, and then at number 2, who was, again, tied with Robert Jordan before, is R.A. Salvatore, another author I'm not a huge fan of. If you hadn't noticed, I read a lot of Forgotten Realms novels. I made a stupid oath. Remember, you don't make oath, guys. To read all the Forgotten Realms novels several years ago at this point. And R.A. Salvatore has written a lot. And almost all of them are Drizzt novels. He's wrote the Cleric Quintet as well. But so I read his Dark Elf trilogy. I've read his Icewind Dale trilogy. I read his Legacy of the Drought, I guess quadrilogy or tetralogy, which was awful for the most part. And then Cleric Quintet, which is just one of my least favorite series. I had the misfortune of reading. And then the Silent Blade, which I actually kind of enjoyed. I guess I could put this together, or whatever the name of this series. Passive Darkness, I think. The Passive Darkness trilogy, which in some ways is actually a tetralogy, but yeah, so I finished Sea of Swords, and I know I also read Spine of the World after my update last year, so I've read 2 more books by him, so he's sitting at 18 books read. He's an author I've kind of come to realize where he sits as an author, and that's to say he's rather mediocre. He's not going to give me much. Sometimes he'll surprise me, and something will be more entertaining than I'm expecting, but now I know that I'm not really a fan, but I know what to expect going into his novels. So the last few I read, even Spine of the World, which is generally considered one of the worst, I was not super disappointed because I know what I was getting. I don't go in expecting greatness anymore. So, or really all that much fun. I go in only knowing that I'm reading these because I screwed myself. But that is to say, you can enjoy Salvatore, and I know a lot of people hate me for not liking Salvatore. But it's just the way it is. I'm just not a huge fan. He's very, like I said, he's very juvenile, which isn't to say he's bad. He's very juvenile. We'll just leave it at that. But and at number 1, who has not changed, probably will not change for a minute here because he's just so much higher. At 24 books read, which is 6 higher, Salvatore, is Brandon Sanderson. So I have read. I used to be able to say I read all the Mistborn books, but I've not read The Lost Metal. I probably should. I've read all the Stormlight books at this point. Even those 2 novellas. Which is funny because I don't think I'm including those novellas in that number. So if I am, that goes up. Darn. Okay. Yeah, I've read, 2 Skyward novels. I haven't continued those. I read Stephen Leith's compilation thing, Arithmetist. The one thing I have read since last year was Children of the Nameless. I read that early this year. I did not really enjoy it. Since the last book I read by him was 2020. It was Rhythm of War, and I actually quite enjoyed it. I found out that he's not very good at writing gothic tales, which doesn't surprise me, but it was still disappointing. And it was twice as long than it needed to be. Anyways, so Children of the Nameless puts Brandon Sanderson up to 24 from 23, and he's at number one. So those are my most read authors. It's funny that like once you get to the last three I mentioned are like not really authors I enjoyed much, with Sanderson, Salvatore, and Jordan. And then you have those authors that I haven't touched in years and I probably will never touch again, like Tiernan and Riordan. But for the most part, there's been a lot of shuffling. There's been a lot of additions. Stephen Erickson, I know, was added. Denning, I believe, and so is Weiss and Hickman, I believe, as well. I would have liked to have someone like Vance actually make the list. Same with Zelazny and Abby. They might be on the list next year, depending on how much I read of them and then of the other ones if they shuffle around again, because I'm sure I'll read. Basically, most of these guys are guys and gals are authors I like to read, most of them, right? And so if Evans comes out with a new book, I'll almost certainly read that. I'll read more Gene Wolfe. I can almost guarantee I'll read more Shepard and Butler and Leiber and Moorcock and Greenwood, right? So, anyways, I know I ask every year, but what are your most read authors? How many books have you read by them? Because I know there's people out there who've read like, oh, I've read 100-something books by Stephen King or something, or I've read, all 400 Asimov novels or something crazy like that. Like I haven't even hit 30 with any of these novels or any of these authors. So, but yeah. So, anyways, Liam from Williams Lyceum. There's my most read author update. I'll catch you next time.